Right. My name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Patrick Taylor. We're at Cana's Feast in Carlton. It's August 5th, 2021. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for asking me.
First question, biggest one to get us started, is why wine?
Well, let's go back to that meandering story that we were talking about earlier. When I was a kid, I was always in the kitchen. Have this love of food, and at an early age I thought I wanted to be a chef, and I worked in kitchens for years, some of my earliest jobs. And I think by the time I graduated from high school, I had the realization that maybe that wasn't a good career for me, and as much as I enjoy cooking, I could sort of see that the scheduling and the pay and all those things were pretty grueling, and maybe I didn't love it that much. And I started thinking about, well, what do I want to do? I want to go to college. This is back in the 80s, and I really liked reading, and I was interested in history, so I started an education in history. And I was 3 years into a history degree before I realized that was also not what I wanted to do. I was waiting tables at the time, and there were 3 other gents there at the restaurant that already had their history degrees. I thought, this doesn't bode well. And I dropped out of school. I still have the textbook, the class that really made me, second guess whether that was what I wanted to do. It's about the driest history text you could ever imagine. It was a course I was taking on history of the ancient world, and written by guys that were ancient, and taught by a guy who was ancient, and the papers you had to write were just as dry as could be. And I've always just kept that as a reminder. But so I dropped out of school. I was going to school full time and working full time, and I dropped out of school and started brewing beer at home, just kind of on a lark. I had a little more time on my hands. I thought, this would be fun, and it was a nut brown ale. I took a class from some shop there and bought some books and read some things about how to do this, and the first batch of beer that I made was a nut brown ale. And I still remember after pitching the yeast, the next morning when I saw the fermentation lock bubbling, and I was just absolutely hooked at that point on fermentation. And I don't think I quite knew it just at that point, but I was living in Minneapolis, sort of a long circuitous route that I ended up there, but I wanted to be back on the West Coast. I had a bunch of friends from high school that were in Portland and Seattle, and I was familiar with a lot of the beers from this region, and decided to move to Portland, and drove back across country, and started calling different breweries and talking to different people. How did you end up there? If this is something I'm interested in, what do I do? And there's this tiny little tavern down on the riverfront. It was a McMiniman's Tavern. I don't know if it's still there, but I was talking to one of the brewers there, and he said, well, you could find a brewery and go wash barrels for 2 or 3 years and hope somebody notices you, or you can go back to college and study biochemistry, and because that's what a lot of this is. And I thought, well, it'd be good to finish my education, and so went from study of humanities to hard science, and it's amazing how the things that you don't think you can do, when you have something interesting enough to motivate you, that you will persevere through, and then maybe realize, maybe I was not giving myself enough credit. After I think my first term of chemistry and physics and calculus, I suddenly got into this math and science type of thinking, and found that I really enjoyed it, and transferred down to Oregon State University. I had heard from several different people about the program down there in brewing, but before I got into getting my paperwork situated, a friend of mine from high school called me up one day and said, "Hey, let's go wine tasting." I'm like, "Okay, that sounds like fun." And we drove down 99. This was in, I don't know, this would have been in 1993, maybe 1994. 1994. And our first stop was at Rex Hill. Lynn Pinner-Ash was the winemaker there at the time. And as we were kind of just looking around, Lynn Pinner-Ash walked by, and I don't remember how the conversation started. She said hello or whatever, saw us looking, and we chatted very briefly, but something had clicked. And we didn't get any further than that in our wine tasting that day. We bought a bottle and sat out in their little amphitheater area, and I really started thinking like, wow, maybe wine is more interesting to me. And there's something about this idea that it's not so formulaic, and there's this collaborative thing between you and Mother Nature. Mother Nature has a lot to say about how the wine turns out, and as does the piece of land that the fruit is growing on. And there's something about that I guess that appealed to me. There's a little bit of like unknown factor. I thought like year to year would really keep you interested. And then I started meeting some other people. I was living in Portland, and friend of a roommate had just finished her master's degree, I think, down at Oregon State, and she was working with Carmo Vasconcelos, and gave me her contact info. I have a distant relative. He's like a third cousin twice removed, or second cousin 3 times removed, or I don't know, but he's a winemaker down in California, and I got in touch with him. He invited me to come down. At the time, he was the winemaker at Liberty Schools, and was also doing stuff, because I think at the time that brand was owned by Opus, if I'm not mistaken, but he had friends at like Sutter Home and ETS Labs and all these institutions down there, and invited me to come down, put me up for the weekend, toured me around, went and took samples out of the vineyard with him, and tasted some blending trials with him. He introduced me to these people, and I met another guy named Stephen Price, who, as it turns out, he did his bachelor's, his master's, and his PhD at Oregon State, and he's been at ETS Labs and does consulting, and guy with a great deal of experience and perspective. And when I met him, I told him that I was more interested in fermentation than necessarily in farming. And he said, okay. He said, my experience has taught me that there's a lot of people in this industry that they know a lot about making wine, but know very little about growing grapes. Or there's a lot of people that know a great deal about growing grapes, but don't know a lot about making wine. And my advice to you would be, if you want to go into the winemaking side, focus on educating yourself with the viticulture side. You'll get plenty of learning and stuff like that on the other end of things, sort of on-the-job training. And that was fantastic advice. So I contacted Carmo Vasconcelos, and she didn't really have any undergrads, in terms of like a tutorial program for undergrads, but she had this fantastic lab, and the University Vineyard at the time, Woodhull 3, which is kind of in the Alpine area down there in central or southern Willamette Valley. And she said, yeah, I can, put you to work here in the lab, and you can help out with stuff like that. But I still didn't know what I was going to do academically. And somehow I ended up hearing about this program that they still have down there called bioresource research. It was a research-based degree for undergraduates, as the name implies, research all around basically biological resources. Oregon State being a land-grant college, there's a lot of focus on, forestry and, crop sciences and turf sciences and agriculture and horticulture. And so I ended up down there in the College of Ag, and my research program that I was given from Carmo was studying rootstock tolerance to low soil pH. And so, worked on that as an undergrad. It ended up turning into a master's degree. I finished my undergrad program, which was very well-rounded science-based. I had to take all the physical sciences and a great deal of biochemistry and microbiology and organic chemistry, all those things that you use in fermentation. But I had fantastic exposure to crop sciences and nutrient cycling and plant water relations and all the things that are helpful in viticulture and plant physiology. So really well-rounded education. It was pretty rigorous. I took for my elective coursework, I ended up taking classes in sensory analysis, that I thought would be fun and useful, and just met a whole bunch of really neat people down there, and very fortunate to have been able to spend time with those instructors and with Carmo and some of the other students that were in the program, and probably one of the best times of my life was down there at university, and just a lot of learning, and really enjoyed that. Finished my undergraduate work, and Carmo said, well, I've got funding for this project if you want to continue it. It would have literally been harder to leave school than stay, and so it turned into a master's program, and which was really nice. I never really saw myself as getting a graduate degree, but once I got into that level of learning, the degree of critical thinking skills that you have to apply just becomes so much more intense. And as somebody who now works in the industry as opposed to in academia, I feel like there's just kind of this benefit for me in my day-to-day work that came out of that, independent of just delaying having to go out in the real world. So, I worked harvest at a number of different places. I think, when I was still doing my graduate work, I had a little bit more time during harvest, had access to university fruit, and started, making these small little 5-gallon batches of Pinot from the university vineyard, and, did that for a few years, and, year 3 kind of plucked up the courage to make a little bit more, made a barrel of Chardonnay, and, probably made some really awful wine, but it was great, it was fun. And you worked at, Benton Lane. I did a little bit of harvest work there, and then before I defended my thesis, I took a term off and went to Australia, and was supposed to do harvest at Shandong. One of the other guys that was in the program, Michael McCauley, he had a connection with Shandong because he had worked with them, and so I got to speak to some of the folks there in Australia at the Shandong location there, and they said, sure, come out, we'll put you to work, we'll house you, etc. And I'm like, great, I'm going to leave early, I'm going to travel, on my way there, make all these stops, going to go to France, and so I got to see some things along the way to Australia, but on the way there, I was in France at the time. I was in the Bordeaux region, staying with a a friend of mine that I met one summer was a research intern from France, and I got a call from Australia and they said, "Oh, we're having trouble getting your visa. Maybe you can work on that." And I'm like, "Oh, no longer in the U.S. That's going to be really hard." And wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I just kind of traveled my way there with a layover in Indonesia. And while I was in the airport in London on my way to Indonesia, I ran into a friend of mine from Oregon State who was an Australian woman doing her master's degree at Oregon State. They're in the Gatwick airport, and Kate Walls, standing like 5 people in front of me, and just a really fortuitous thing. Long story short, we hung out in Indonesia for a week or two, and they said, "Don't worry, we'll connect you with a harvest job." And they put me to work, and stayed with some friends of theirs, and had just a fantastic experience there. I worked at a winery called Nepenthe that was in South Australia. It was in the Adelaide Hills. I think Peter Lesky was the winemaker there at the time, but really good folks. They were really very kind to me, and had the time of my life. Went diving on the, out in the Great Barrier Reef, and just a really fantastic time. Came back, finished my thesis, finished school, and ended up working, doing a bunch of sort of volunteer work here and there at different wineries, just to try and get some more experience. There was a kind of interesting little tasting room place that Bishop Creek Cellars owned that was sort of on the edge of the Pearl District. People go in there, and they had these wines, and Rich Cushman was sort of the consulting winemaker. And I can't remember exactly where the fruit came from, but it was from Columbia Valley, and they were Bordelais varietals, and they had like a barrel of each of them, and people could come in and they could taste them and make their own blend, and we would bottle it for them, and they'd take it home. And I worked there for a short time. I worked in the tasting room at Amity. Was fortunate enough to to spend some time with Myron on the Peripheria. And Patrick McGilligan, who was part of that organization, threw me some hours at the Oregon Wine Tasting Room, and got exposed to more wines, and including Andrew Rich in his wines. And sometime around, I think, 2002, when the studio was opening down there for their first harvest, I had reached out to Andrew, and he gave me a harvest position down there. So I really got to work with some varieties outside of most of my exposure, which had been Pinot. And he's got a lot of different Bordelais varietals and Rhone varietals and stuff. And so that was great. Then went to work for Tory Moore, was the assistant winemaker there for a year under Ryan Harms. Fantastic guy. I'm sure you've got to have an interview with him. And then, so I was there for about a year, I guess, and then came here in 2004, and was hired as the assistant winemaker. And I remember when I interviewed with Gino Cuneo, had this great interview with him, and he said, well, we'd like to offer you the position. And I said, well, if you don't mind, I'd like to think about it. And I had maybe a harvest position or something like that at Rex Hill that was in the offing, and of course the big place, big Pinot house, and he said, well, if you don't mind my asking, what is it that you're kind of considering? And I said, well, I really want to make Pinot. And he's okay. He's like, well, we make Pinot here, and I'd like to think it's good. We were working with some fantastic fruit, Meredith Mitchell Pinot, and he said, but you get to work with all these other varietals, all these Italian varietals that I had no experience with. Bordelais varietals, Rhone varietals, and that really stuck with me. He sent me home with a bottle of Nebbiolo. I think he asked me, is there something here? He showed me the wines he has. Is there something here you want to take home? And I think I was going to take home a bottle of Pinot or Syrah. I don't remember. And he's like, take this home. And he sent me home with a bottle of Nebbiolo. And I went home and I dwelt on it. And the next day I called him and said, yeah, I'm on board. I'd like to think that was the best decision I'd made for my career. I didn't think that I would be here this long. I thought, I'd be 3 to 5 year plan, and maybe go somewhere else, get some more experience, and etc. But I got a lot of exposure to Southern Oregon fruit. At the time we were working with, a little less than half of our fruit was from Southern Oregon, a little less than half was from Eastern Washington, Columbia Valley, and then the balance of that being Pinot from here in the valley. And so I got to work with fruit from a lot of different regions and a lot of different varieties that were expressing different things because of where they were growing. And eventually, we decided that we liked the expression of the more northerly grown Italian varietals, etc., owing to that longer day-night thing during the growing season and the cooler temperatures that they tend to experience out there at night in high desert plateau. Mm-hmm. So, now I guess about 80%, 85% of our fruit is from Eastern Washington. And, we still work with Pinot, and we now make white varietals. We didn't do anything like that when I first started here. I can't imagine not working with Willamette Valley fruit. This is my home, and the climate here is just, it's a part of my blood. I really feel this place resonates with me. But for our model and for our customers and what we do, carrying on that legacy of making Italian varietal wines and Bordeaux style blends and Bordelais varietal wines and Rhone and that sort of thing, that we need a little more heat than the Willamette Valley can muster, reliably at least. And Washington is just the Columbia Valley is a great place to grow those. Over the years, some of our fruit sources have changed, but I'm still working with Ciel du Cheval vineyards, and it's shifted from original owner founder guy who planted Ciel du Cheval, Jim Holmes. I think he and Patty Patricia Gillis Kiona, I think, first two really to establish vineyard sites. They helped each other plant each other's vineyards, and some really early pioneers up on Red Mountain. And now his son, Richard Holmes, is in charge of operations and managing the site, and he's working with a chap named Cade Cassiato, who's also an Oregon State graduate, who ended up doing his graduate work, I think, at Eastern Washington, if I'm not mistaken. But to go from sort of being Gino's assistant, working with Jim Holmes, to taking the reins here in 2007, and now working with Richard Holmes, it's been really cool to see how that story continues to evolve, and how the same blocks of fruit that we've been working with have evolved in that 17-year period. I started here in 2004, and really fortunate to be able to, we don't own our own vineyards, but to be able to work with the same fruit for that period of time. And along the way, we've picked up some other vineyard sites that are just truly singular. We work with this tiny little vineyard site, kind of in the far off foothills of Mount Adams. It's east of Mount Adams. It's the westerlymost planting in the Yakima Valley AVA, and it's up on this slope, high elevation site, north facing. It's above the original flood plain, from the Missoula flood. So the soil profile, it's all like ancient blue clay soils, and very different than the sedimentary soils that define 95% of agriculture in the Columbia Basin. So getting to work with some of the same varietals in a completely different setting, in the greater Columbia Basin, that's been pretty cool. We started working with them in 2012. Started working with, at that same time, with fruit from Destiny Ridge Vineyard in 2012 with Jared and Allie Boyle. And we, about almost half of our fruit comes from that site. And we work with, a dozen different varietals from there. Those people, they'll give you the shirt off their back. They don't know the meaning of the word no. They're just, whatever. They just, what do you want? What do you need? Been really fun working with them. And, working with people that just are fun and, dedicated to what they do. We're just, I couldn't be more fortunate to A, be working in this industry, and to B, find myself, here, 16, 17, I don't know if I think I'm coming up maybe on my 18th vintage here. And to be working with the people that I do is just truly a blessing, I guess, for me. There's been, for me, a lot of personal growth, there's a lot of professional growth in there too, and, honing skills along the way. Like every vintage has something new to teach you, and it seems like every year there's some oh wow, haven't had to deal with that before. And so it's nice that it keeps you on your toes, and it gives you another tool in your toolbox. Now you know how to deal with this, and if that comes up again. And that's been something that's really kept me engaged and kept me from getting bored. Small place here, you wear a lot of hats. That also keeps you from getting bored. Having the opportunity to work directly with our customers has taught me a lot, and continues to teach me. We've been so busy in the last year and a half. We've kind of changed how we engage with our customers, and there's a bit of a labor shortage, and so we all find ourselves working a lot of extra hours, and I work on a lot of the weekends, just assisting the tasting room effort and supporting our staff here, and a lot of that is like bussing tables or bringing things out for people. And having worked here as long as I have, a lot of our regular customers recognize me, and so you end up having conversations with folks, or if they ask you a question about the wine, maybe somebody who's never visited, gives you an opportunity to talk with them and hear a little bit about what brought them here, what their interest is. And the older I get, the more questions I find myself asking, as opposed to trying to tell them things. I like to ask them questions in here, and it's educational. But so that's been a big part of my professional growth too, and has informed a lot of what we're doing in the cellar. I'm not sure how many other places in the valley or in the region have essentially the same cellar crew for the period of time that me and the guys have been working together. But Inez and Omero, they were working here before I started, and their skill set and their understanding of what we do on an annual basis. And the rapport that you develop and the relationship that you develop with people working with them for that long, you can't put a value on that. I've watched their kids grow up. We've all kind of gotten old together. We joke about it. But that's for me has been a fantastic experience. And I count myself to be very fortunate there as well. Jason Brumley, our assistant winemaker, I think you've got maybe an interview scheduled with him coming up. He came here originally. He started in the tasting room, and but then I don't know. I think he went to Australia and did a harvest, and then came back, and I gave him a harvest position. It might have been 2010. I think it was his first vintage, and he kept coming back for more. Vintage after vintage, and when it came time to bring on a new assistant winemaker, at the time Dan Dury was our assistant winemaker, and Dan is gone on to be the winemaker at Lady Hill. But Jason had worked here so much and had shown such an incredible enthusiasm and passion and just a degree of interest that along with a great wealth of just bookish knowledge, and he had enough experience. I'm like, this guy. And I called him up and offered a job, and he was like, yeah. And so we've been working together for many years, and he's been in the assistant winemaker position, I think 2015 or 16. I think maybe it was 16 was his first vintage as assistant winemaker. So the unit back there, the four of us have been together for quite some time, and we continue to stretch our notion of how things should be done, and every year offers us a new opportunity to learn new things and do things differently and improve on what we're doing. And I can't say enough good things about the team that I have to be able to work with. We have an incredibly loyal customer base. We have Cellar Club members here that have been, we didn't really have the same Cellar Club that we have now that we did when I started, but we had kind of like it was a futures buyers, back when selling futures was a big thing. And we still have a lot of those same customers, and they'll come in sometimes and they'll bring out an old bottle and they'll talk about it, and I remember that, and it's pretty cool, and it gives you a lot of opportunity to reflect on the fact that what we do, your day-to-day stuff changes throughout the year. You're on this sort of odd, agricultural cycle, and then on top of that, with the aging of the wine, and things are always changing throughout the year, and there's a lot of cool things in there, and there's a lot of unfun things, and the admin and the record keeping and stuff like that, and sitting in front of a computer doing emails. I think every job, no matter how cool it is, has stuff like that to do, but at the end of the day, what all of us here in the industry, what we get to do is be involved in making something that at the end of the day, it's meant to bring joy to people's lives. That's pretty special, to bring people together is, I think that if we were making widgets, I don't know if I would have lasted half as long. But when you have an opportunity to reflect on that all of your efforts are at the end of the day are meant to produce something that, you know, brings people together and facilitates people gathering, people sharing food, people sharing stories. That's rich, and I don't know what other type of job I could do that would give me that opportunity. And you know, I expect that will carry me through, you know, for the next 17 years here. I don't know. I don't know if I have 17 years left. I think that no matter where you are in this industry, if you haven't yet really solidified that understanding, you know, you will, or you'll end up probably going somewhere else. It's not quite as romantic and easy of a thing to do on a, you know, sort of like a day-to-day basis. And you know, you get people in the industry talking, I don't know, at the end of a long, hard day, and you know, there are some real challenges to being in the industry, and it's becoming a more competitive thing, and there's more and more, what's the word I'm looking for? Regulatory and you know, challenges, compliance and stuff like that can make the work a real drag. And you know, this last year and a half, 2 years, my heart goes out to you know, the folks that you know, ended up leaving because of, you know, the challenges that presented. And you know, at the end of the day, though, you know, if you can persevere through that, and if we can, you know, get through the other side of this with, I don't know, some return to, like, or at least something that you can count on, you know, in terms of how you do business. I think that magic still holds an attraction, and I imagine that most people that work in this industry feel the same way. I hope they do.
It's a very thorough answer. I have to go back and ask some questions now to go back in time a little bit. So I want to talk I want to talk about your first harvest experience, what you remember from first time on harvest. You have this interest, you have some education. Tell me about that, and what about the work appealed to you and made you want to keep doing it?
So I guess my first harvest experience, you know, I went down to Oregon State in fall of '97, and so when the growing season started in '98, I was working out in the university vineyard, and you know, helping, you know, tend to the vines, but you know, also collecting research and stuff. And then, you know, we did a lot of, like, you know, harvesting for our data, but you know, the ag crew at Oregon State, bunch of really neat people. They had, you know, been, you know, also using, you know, because they part of the operation there. They had vines, you know, research vines at Lewis Brown Farms, and then, you know, research vines at various different wineries around the valley, and then some at this, you know, at the University Vineyard. So there was always fruit available, including the Alpine Vineyards fruit, which half of that was the stuff that wasn't research was U-pick. And I think they sold some to their neighbor there too. And so, you know, I don't know, it was like $1 a pound or something like that. And, you know, so you scrape together $100 for your 5-gallon thing or whatever. I can't remember. But so, you know, you've got this, you know, couple 5-gallon totes, or I think maybe what we were doing is combining them into those 20-gallon, you know, larger things, and, you know, doing a punch down with your hand, and it's in your kitchen at home. And that doesn't really qualify as harvest, but in a manner of speaking, it kind of got your beak wet for at least the feel of harvest, and that part hasn't changed. My first commercial like harvest vintage was at Benton Lane with Gary Horner. Larger size operation for Willamette Valley back then, but chill guy, really cool demeanor, and take that to the bank. When you're working in long hours, during harvest, because you're on the fruit schedule at that point, and then not only the picking, but then you're fermenting, and you've got once that started, you're kind of on the yeast's schedule and the timetable of those fermentations. So you put in just an incredible amount of hours, and you're not eating well. You're eating a lot of you're eating a lot of sugar because you're tasting the fruit constantly. I'm sure that my sugar intake from like September, through harvest just goes through the roof. And then, once you start eating sugar, you start craving sugar and, grabbing a donut or whatever. So, it's physically, the hours are long. You're probably not eating well. You're breathing a lot of like CO2 that's just kind of in the air. You ventilate and things like that, but you're putting your head, we've got these open top fermenters, these little 4-foot things, and and you go up to the edge of it and you waft it because you want to smell. That'll tell you what's happening in there. You want to smell it, and so you're constantly huffing CO2, and you're not sleeping a lot because you're working long hours, and that'll make you cranky. That'll make most people cranky. So being able to see in my first harvest, to watch and I think the assistant winemaker at the time there quit in the middle of harvest, but Gary was cool as a cucumber, and I can't say that I've always been cool as a cucumber. It's not in my nature, but 20 or so harvests will teach you to learn to be a little more cool during harvest, and if you can do that, it gives you a little more energy to partake in. Oh, I wish there was a word for it. I'm sure the French have a word for it, and because their language, they tend to have more words for subtle romantic things. But there is a, for lack of a better word that I can find at this moment, there is a magic that happens during harvest where you're intensely involved in a cycle, a natural cycle that involves all kinds of different beings, if you will, right? All kinds of life and life forms, and the people aside that you're working with that are all working toward that same effort. You have the vines, and you have all the ecology and the the web of life that's out in the vineyard, that's participating in and contributing to this, and then you bring that into the cellar, and now you have these microbes, these countless different microbes that are involved in contributing to the process. And there's something I think that's unique. Like, I feel it every year, and I know Jason does. He and I have had endless conversations about it. There are literally probably trillions of microbes that are like in this really small space, inside the cellar. And I don't care what your spiritual background is. If you reflect on that for a minute and you think about how that energy is in that space, and you are there and you're putting out energy, and I've noticed that contentious cellars I think they produce contentious wines, and harmonious cellars produce harmonious wines. And I think so. There's something to that, but there is this weird buzz that you get for us. Our harvest goes for 2.5 months, and as it winds down, and you can feel it, things quieting down, and then both Jason and I talk about like this odd sort of low-grade depression that you go through afterwards, because you're just like in this like, wow, it's kind of like you just left the best party that you've ever been to, and as it quiets down, there's sort of like this like and then you're into this period of hibernation. So that aspect of harvest, I think for me has always been there, and my awareness of it has only deepened, over the years. And I, was probably only subconsciously aware of it in those first few years. And you're probably excited, like, oh, this is really cool. And, when you put your hand in it, it's kind of like that first time I saw that fermentation lock ticking away on that first batch of beer I brewed. When you do a commercial harvest is a little bit harder to ignore. And like I said, certainly as you go, that really comes through and is distilled to a point of like, even though you have this sort of dread of like, oh, do I have all the things done that I need to do before, harvest is going to hit, and then it's going to be, you hit the ground running. But as soon as you do, it's kind of like pure joy, stress aside, you get caught up in that magic.
You mentioned earlier the advice that Steve Price gave you about kind of going into the vineyard first and mastering that before. So tell me about sort of that part of your education, learning the vineyard part of the work, and how that's sort of come forward in your vineyard work now, working with the vineyards you work with. What are you looking for in vineyard sites, and what are you asking of them that you will make for better wine?
Couple parts to that question, I guess. And given my tendency to meander, I might have to go back to part of that. The academic side of working in the vineyard, you learned a lot about, obviously photosynthesis and plant gas exchange and water usage and nutrients and looking at the vines and seeing like, this is a happy, healthy vine, this is an unhappy, healthy vine. Get exposure to, vine pathology and it's a good foundation. I learned, I definitely don't want to be a farmer. I love to garden, and I've got, more plants than I could responsibly have in the space that I have at home. I love plants, but farming is that is hard work, and we, I think as a society on a whole, don't really well recognize that. That is some of the hardest work you can do. Having an understanding of what goes into that and what it takes, and specifically with grapes, really helps me. I think probably the best thing that I learned, particularly in the early years, about relationships with growers and how to work together and how to get to that end goal, was that growers, farmers, they're proud people. They should be. There's a certain amount of pride that comes with, this is my land, these are my efforts, and at the end of the day, this is what I have to show for it. I don't care what your academic education is, or even what your experience, with actual farming is. The worst thing you could possibly do to grower relations or to being part of a collaborative effort to grow quality fruit is to walk onto some guy's land and start telling him what to do and how to do things. That is just, I think it's, for me, my approach has always been to ask questions of like, hey, what would happen if we were to do this, or what happens if we wanted this, what's the best way to do that? They're out there on that piece of land every day, year after year. They know better what to do to get to a certain point. Hopefully, by the time you've gotten to the point where you're sitting down with a grower to talk about, for me, it's a long-term relationship. I'm not interested in, buying fruit one year from somebody. There's not a lot of interest in that for me, and it's not a good business plan. But hopefully, by the time you've got to the point where you're sitting down, you know a little bit about the quality of the fruit that they grow. So they should have earned your respect, at least for that. What comes in the next year or so is the learning the rapport that you have with them as a person, how they communicate, and that's critical, I think. And part of developing a really healthy rapport and a business relationship that's built on trust is more of the approach of like understanding that you're both in it for the purpose of making high quality product, and recognizing that, saying how do we do this together, and sharing ideas. I have a okay understanding of how vines work and vine physiology, and I've got better part of 2 decades of like hard experience and exposure to vines growing to help that along the way. But the real experience is with the grower, and we share our wine with them, we share our philosophy and what we're trying to do, and so that really helps with achieving that goal, particularly for us and for me as a winemaker. My background being in cool climate viticulture, and Pinot being my first love as wines go, I tend to prefer wines that maybe express a little more acidity. And in the early years, I preferred wines that expressed a lot of acidity and tannin and tension. Being a young man, I think tension is part of your, kind of energetic profile. And when I look back at some of my older wines, I'm like, oh, well, yeah. I remember going through blending trials in the early days and tasting these softer wines and going, God, it's flabby. It doesn't have any, zing. It doesn't have any, it doesn't make my mouth water. And now I go back and I taste some of those older wines. I'm like, wow, that's a pretty lean wine. As I've gotten older and as I've paid a little more attention to our customers, my approach to that has softened a little bit. But I think relative to most of the wine that's being made in Eastern Washington, at least from my experience with the growers, we're the first people picking, out there in those various blocks, and it's because I'm looking for a certain type of profile, and I like to think that I'm using sort of, I have like cool climate sensibilities applying to wines that kind of need warm climate to grow, or a very, very narrow band of land that you can find to grow that style of wine. So to answer the question about when you look for sites or for growers to work with, while we still work with Ciel du Cheval and foundationally speaking, they are contributing, the bedrock of fruit for our program. They have for, over 20 years. Before I started working here, that relationship goes back and produces, some of our marquee wines, the Nebbiolo, the Sangiovese Grosso. That relationship I don't see is changing. The newer relationships going back to 2012, those were about me looking for cooler pockets in a warm area. So vineyard sites that are right on the river, on Columbia River, Destiny Ridge Vineyard, Roosevelt Ridge Vineyard, or sites like Slide Mountain. This magical place that is in the Columbia Basin, but the wines, it's just on the edge of that, and it's high elevation, north facing slope. It's a slower ripening site, and it produces some very dynamic fruit that's nothing like the other wines that I'm working with, and so that allows me to achieve a number of things, and also produce wines that are a little bit softer. And so those are the sites that I'm looking for, are cooler pockets in warmer areas. And if I was looking for a new Pinot site, I'd be doing the same thing, maybe in the coastal range, or I don't know. But it's getting warmer. So I don't think, I haven't had a vintage in any of these sites where we've failed to ripen the fruit. You could practically plant grapes in a cave out there in Columbia Valley and ripen them. There's plenty of sunshine, it's warm, and so I like these cooler pockets that are going to ripen a little bit slower. And those are the newer sites, and that balances out that foundational, Red Mountain grown, intense heat and even wind and, arid conditions that produce these wines of intense, power and structure. So currently, as we're, growing and looking to grow our production, there's another site that I, was planted a couple of years ago that's they're going to be pulling their first harvest off it this year. It's on the Oregon side, and it's in the gorge, and I just visited there. Usually early on in the growing season, Jason and I will go out and we'll spend a couple days out there checking out the sites, talking to the growers, looking, okay, this is kind of the start for vintage, and looking at how things are. And we stopped off at this site, and we were both like, wow, this is one of those like very different sites. Super high elevation, north facing slope, and surrounded by like cherry orchards. It's just cherries everywhere out there, and then this a little higher up, these grapevines. So those are the sites that continue to interest me, and that would be if I was looking for more fruit, that I needed to go to another vineyard for. That would be kind of what I would be looking for, is something in that vein. And then, of course, obviously the varietals that you're looking for, and then the people that are working there. You get the greatest fruit in the world from a place, but if you don't like the grower, or if you have a really difficult time with the rapport, or eventually it's not going to last. Knowing that, it's kind of incumbent upon me as the person who's looking for something to how do I make that happen with them? If I really like that site, like how do I make this relationship with these people productive? But that's not so hard. I think you set your ego and pride aside, and it's amazing how easy all that can be.
It's complicated. It's complicated relationships.
Yeah.
I like it.
Human beings are complicated.
So tell me about you mentioned the kind of the philosophy of the place. Tell me about when you were hired here, what it was that you were hired into, and how that's evolved over the years.
The philosophy here has always been, and goes back to Gino, because I mean, ultimately this was his vision, and he attracted a group of friends and a group of people around him that saw what his vision was and shared that vision, and came together to make Cana's Feast what it is today. But that philosophy again is about hospitality. I think somewhere on our website or somewhere in our mission statement or part of our logo, it says something about we want our wine not necessarily to be the centerpiece of the conversation. We want it to facilitate that conversation. We want it to be the thing that people come together around a table, food, friends, family, and bottled wine it makes those things coming together pretty easy, and it helps to facilitate that. And the purpose there is just to give people more opportunity to develop connection, opportunity to slow down and have authentic conversation, and turn off all the digital stimulus and connect with each other. So that's at the heart of what we do, and everybody that works here, that's kind of the first exposure that you get. I can't recall if it was ever distilled into a message that way when I started, but it was very apparent, because one of the interview questions is, can you remember your first wine food pairing experience, and what was that, and can you describe that? So from the start, it's always been about the dinner table, and that sense of hospitality. Obviously over the centuries, and wherever you travel in different regions, that looks a little bit different, and how people gather, and as families have changed a little bit, that changes too. And I think that as a group of people, we're very, we're acutely aware of that, and want to not get so caught up exactly on, stylistically, how does that look? Is it a Mediterranean table? And, as much as it's like, maybe that's what we've cultivated here for the aesthetic, but it doesn't matter. Maybe it's just you and another person that is, sitting down, whether it's, a coworker, is, or your best friend. That's, the way people define family now is different, and we 100% honor that and want to be able to facilitate, because it's that sharing and coming together and gathering that's the most important part. And so everyone that works here, when they some of the newer people, we've got a lot of old hands here, but some of the newer people, that's one of the things that we tell them is this is our philosophy, and hospitality is about us serving you, the customer. This isn't a place that's for a platform for us to put a spotlight on us and say, look at us. It's about what can we do for you? What can we do to make your experience here a good one? Or even going back to learning about what our customers appreciate about the wines. What can I do in the winemaking process to make this a better experience for you, this wine? So that has evolved a little bit, but the core of that has always been about hospitality, bringing people together, creating an opportunity for people to gather and share.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when it at the time it was open, or the time it was started, not a lot of places around here that were not focusing on Pinot. So I'm curious about finding clientele and finding people to buy. Has that changed and gotten easier, more difficult? How has that changed over time?
This is going to be an odd way to answer this. I feel like in some ways it's always been a little bit easier because you're offering something unique and different. But that can also present some challenges, to find what your place is in the greater fold in the community here. So while it does have a few challenges, I feel like that those challenges have become less as we have continued to thrive here and be a part of the community and contribute in ways that we can to the community. And while we may not be sort of a marquee producer in the valley or even producing the marquee grape, we're not a big Pinot house. I think we still contribute to the community, and we've developed relationships and with our neighbors and with people in the industry. So that I feel like has gotten easier to find where our place is, and to feel comfortable in our place. I remember the first day I met Gino Cuneo. I was an undergrad, and it was at some technical meeting, and he stood up and he at the end of this someone's research talk, and he I had these questions, and I was like, that guy's different. Gino's always been a kind of like a black sheep here in the valley, and it's part of his DNA. He's an innovator, and but I don't consider us to be sort of a black sheep organization here. We offer something a little bit different. There's a lot of people that are doing that too, and Rich is one of them who's been doing it here for a long time. But find me a Pinot producer around here that even some of the more established ones that hasn't been making Syrah for 10 or more years, or that doesn't have other arrows in their quiver, and even you're going to see newer varietals being planted so that they're not being imported from other areas as things get a little bit warmer. Cab Franc, you're going to see other things being planted around here, and so it's going to become less and less of a wow, you guys are really different. On the other side of things, in terms of attracting customers, that's just been like shooting fish in a barrel almost. Because even if people haven't heard of you, if they've been out tasting Pinot all day, they're visiting the area. Hey, this is our third stop. And we'd like to try something different. We're kind of filled up on Pinot. Is there, people get pointed in our direction. But as our presence has grown, that's kind of one of the things that we've become known for, is being a stop where people can come to get Italian varietal wines and Bordeaux varietal wines. And as the population here grows, you've got a lot of people coming from a lot of different areas, and obviously, if when people are coming here, they're coming here, I think, because they also like those varietals. But there's a lot of people that Pinot isn't their favorite varietal, and there's more of those people now as this area grows, and I think that the population has grown perhaps more so than the number of places that are doing more than Pinot, as at least, or that are very visible about what they're doing. So, like, our customer base continues to grow. I guess, probably everybody does, because the wine industry is more visible, and we've established ourselves in the industry in Oregon has established itself as a wine region, and people come here from all over the world because of that. And so everyone's customer base is growing. It does feel to me like it's gotten a little bit easier, but I'm also going to credit that to the staff here and the job they do of hosting people and creating a warm hospitable environment, because that's, people come and they have a bad experience, they're likely not going to come back, or they're going to tell people they had a bad experience. And so, having a staff that recognizes the importance of creating a warm environment for people, that's helped, I think, attract customers too, I think.
Are there any specific challenges that come with Italian wine, either from the making it side or from the selling it side?
Well, the selling it side, for sure. There's this weird experiment called Prohibition that really kind of gutted the established wine industry, which at that time was rich with Spanish immigrants, Italian immigrants, German immigrants, French. And I haven't done extensive research on this, and there's probably a graduate paper in there somewhere for somebody to look at post-Prohibition. What was the largest immigrant community to reestablish? Because if you look at here in the U.S., like most of the visible varietals, the terms in the cellar, the terms in the vineyard, almost all of the industry seems to have been rooted in a French concept. Maybe the Italians got more into the selling and distribution side of things post-Prohibition. But because of that dark mark on our history of getting rid of this culture, it's taken longer in reestablishing that culture to get the Italian varietal message out there. My exposure to Italian varietals was pretty minimal before I started working here. I worked in restaurants for years, and even in the front of house too, waiting tables. And I recall some of the early experiences I had, and the ones that I do remember, working in little Italian places, were selling Barbaresco and Barolo. Those are my earliest exposure to Italian varietal wines. And then when I started working here, of course, then you just fell down the rabbit hole. You spend a little bit of time in Italy, and your exposure deepens. You read stuff from a guy like Ian D'Agata. This guy has written this kind of like an encyclopedia on Italian indigenous varietals, and it's mind blowing. And I would love to see the broadening of cultivation of Italian varietals. I know there's quite a few people around here that are doing that, and even established growers, Arnace, that one, it keeps cropping up, and I'd like to see that one continue to grow, because it's just it makes an amazing wine. It grows well here, and people love it. But there is that marketing side of getting people familiar with those wines. Here in the U.S. we're very varietally oriented. Well, it's not just the U.S. It's the New World, and honestly, the system of selling a wine purely based on its appellation, there's a movement away from that, even in the Old World, because not everybody is from that area, and not everybody has the time to educate themselves and recognize that when you buy a white Burgundy, they don't know that that's also the that Chardonnay. It's the same grape. They don't that has created, I think, a hurdle for importers. And as they want more access to New World markets, and even just talking to people, just people outside of the industry in Europe, and their knowledge of, they may not know that Nebbiolo is the predominant grape, and is what is in a Barolo or in a Barbaresco. And those wines aren't like, they're not like everywhere on every table. So as the messaging around how wines are sold changes a little bit, we've got some catching up to do to get people familiar with the varietals. Our best opportunity, I mean, there's social media and you can do all kinds of digital outreach, but there's nothing like pouring something for somebody, and when they're sipping on it or tasting on it, to tell them about, this is where that varietal originated, this is how it tends to express itself. Here are some situations where you might want to pair this with this type of meal. And as we've done that, I feel like people's awareness is growing. It definitely has with our customer base, not only with our regulars, but you see other producers that are doing Italian varietal wines, and we've been hosting for, I don't know, over 10 years. We obviously took last year and this year off from doing it, but this event that was geared at bringing together producers of Italian varietal wines, from here in the valley, and pouring them for customers. We do this event, called Italy in the Valley, and you get 500-600 people that show up, and there's a fantastic learning opportunity. You've got a critical mass of samples to show people. Here's 5 examples of Sangiovese. A lot of people that have maybe they've never tasted one or never heard of it, and their only connection to it is that wicker basket, with the red and white checkered table. So there's a lot of room to grow there, but I'm finding that proposition, particularly with the younger generation of wine drinkers, they're seeking out that, and instead of having to convince them, here's wine. Oh yeah, no, you should try. I know it's not Cab, or I know it's not Pinot. You like Pinot? You don't really try this Nebbiolo. You might like it. Younger wine drinkers, they're like, oh man, they jump into it with both feet. And so I'm finding that it's becoming easier, and it's more importantly, it's what we do, and it's what we really enjoy doing. So I don't see that as ever, taking a back seat to our production.
So tell me about your winemaking style or philosophy and how that's changed. You mentioned kind of the younger man wines you made. Tell me about that, and what kind of wines would you say you're making now?
Part of my philosophy that hasn't changed, aside from the sort of the cool climate approach, and wanting to always have I think the acidity is truly the backbone of a wine. Everything is built around that. The chemistry is dependent on that. How it interacts with your palate, how that wine ages, all those things, how it expresses its aroma. It's all about the acidity. But finding that sweet spot, I hope I've gotten better at doing that and putting that into balance with the tannins. But the part of my philosophy that's never changed is that if the various varietals that we make here, or the blends that we make, a lot of them are legacy programs, and I've changed and tweaked them maybe a little bit to sort of suit a little bit about how I feel they best express themselves. But it's always been about trying to be true to the thing about the wine that inspired me to work with that grape and make that. So I don't want to change a varietal so much that it becomes something I don't recognize from the original thing. So particularly with varietal wines, I really, really want them to express the varietal characteristic, the thing that makes this grape taste different and unique from that grape. If you're only making one or two different wines, or wines from one or two different grapes, that's quite a bit easier. It becomes critical if you're making a couple dozen different wines, you can't. Why would you make Sangiovese and Cab if those two wines were, indistinguishable? And I mean, that's a simplified answer, but you apply that to, you've got all these different varietals, and so you're always looking for that thing about that grape, that makes it unique. And for me, it starts with like that grape's origin, or where it was popularized, or more importantly, the wine that I had that, or the wines that I've had that have inspired me to want to work with that grape, and like, I guess on some level paying homage, or not necessarily emulating, but like I want that to be reminiscent of. I want people to recognize, the Nebbiolo I make. I want them to recognize that as the grape. When that if they're familiar with Barbaresco or Barolo or Nebbiolo de Longe or Nebbiolo de Alba, the thing about that grape, its characteristic, I want that expressed in my wine, and so and across all the varietals that we make, and obviously the area where we grow them is a little bit different. The climate, the soils, all those things are a little bit different. Grapevines are incredibly malleable and adaptable. It's shocking what you can do to make them adapt to elicit certain characteristics, and that's the voodoo of a brilliant viticulturalist, is to be able to bring out nuances in the quality of the fruit based on what they're doing with the canopy, what they're doing with their soil profile. But at the end of the day, as Jason and I, as Inez and Homero, as the four of us as a group, everything that we're doing, in our regime back there is designed to bring out the most amount of varietal expression as we can. And then the rest of the stuff is like, spice from a spice cabinet, the cooperage that we're using, the selection of yeast, whether we're going to do a spontaneous or native ferment versus, hey, here we've got this, varietal from Southern Rhone. We're going to use a yeast strain isolated from Southern Rhone. Those little bits of things are we have those ways for nuances to then fashion it in kind of our in our way, mm-hmm. and in the way that resonates with our customers.
So I know that in addition to making wine, you also make some vermouth. So tell me about your vermouth and how that came about.
Oh, I was at a trade tasting with our distributor, our then distributor, and Dan Dury, I'd mentioned our old assistant winemaker. We were there together. We were pouring our wines, and we'd take turns like manning the table and then going around tasting stuff. And he came back and had this puzzled look on his face, and I was like, "What do you got there?" And he's like, "I don't know. I mean, I don't really like it. Maybe you'll like it. I don't know. It's just weird." And I was like, "What is it?" He's like, "Like Barolo Chinato." I'd never heard of it. And it was just like, my first exposure to. I mean, it was a Chinato, so it wasn't technically a vermouth, but an aromatized wine. And then, like a nanosecond later, I realized it's made from Nebbiolo as the base wine, and we have Nebbiolo, and wow, wouldn't this be fun to create something like this? It's wine with different botanicals. If you don't know what vermouth is, it's a wine that you then add different botanicals to for it to be a vermouth. The main bittering herb and bittering characteristic needs to come from Artemisia absinthium, wormwood. There are different categories of aromatized wines. Chinato is its own. But and then you sweeten it to a degree, to varying degree depending on style, and you fortify it, with grape neutral spirits, unaged brandy. Away you go. For Barolo Chinato, Nebbiolo is the base wine, and so that's where I started. We worked with a chef for many years, a woman named Lisa Langston, really, really neat lady, incredibly talented and creative, and she and I spent the better part of a week just goofing off with, building a list of different botanicals and then doing extracts and tasting them and making notes, and that's sort of where the Barolo Chinato rabbit hole started, and so ours is, since it's not from Barolo, it's we call it Chinato after the style, and I was just in this crazy creative bubble that found an odd, like, vice-like grip on all things bitter, and got really into different bitters and aperitivos and digestivos, and after releasing the Chinato, just was exposed to this whole world of craft cocktail people, and made all these friends, and grew my knowledge on all those things, and that was an incredible creative period for me. I had so much fun working on that. Spun off my own brand, because like, it's hard to fit that into the context of what we're doing here, and so I this small brand, made a couple different vermouths, and I'd formulated a bunch of other ones, just never really quite got around to bringing to production. It difficult to do all things. It was an incredible creative itch that I just furiously scratched for several years, and in the end, it's doing something small like that. It's good to, like, keep that small, because it'll take on its own life, and it needs to be tended to, and there's a lot of administrative work, and it takes a lot to do that, and you have a limited amount of time. And I think ultimately I felt like, as I'm getting a little older, I kind of like, I like what we're doing here, and I also want to have a little bit of free time. So that's a little less of a thing right now, unless I could find somebody to pass that torch to. I'd love to. There's this really neat guy. I don't know how this fits into your mission, but because they're distillers and different various aspects of alcohol production, but vermouth is wine, and there are more and more wineries that are doing little vermouth projects. But there's a guy, Neil Coughlin. If you haven't met him or heard of his name, Imbue Vermouth, I'm sure you've seen it all over the shelves or on the back of the bar. We kind of had these parallel paths that sort of emerged right about the same time, and he and I became good friends in this little world, and we continue to talk creatively. And if you ever wanted to expand on that category, that dude would be great to talk to.
Absolutely. Chat about it after the interview.
Sure.
Find out some more about him. I want to talk about this place a little bit. You mentioned a little bit when we got here, kind of the history of the site here. So tell me about, again, kind of what it was when you got here, and what has changed over the years here at Cana's Feast Tasting Room.
Well, when you first came in, and I said, we've changed some little things that have changed inside. Not a whole lot. The view hasn't really changed much. The catchment pond that we have down there, the stuff growing in it has gotten a little bit tall this year, and we haven't got around to trimming that back, so it's taken up a little bit of the view. But pretty much the view of the coastal range and the fields out here and the farming, the pastoral charm that I think makes Carlton like just as quaint of a little wine hub as you could ask for. That this little corner here hasn't changed much relative to that. Carlton proper, the town, that's changed a little bit. There's more houses. The business community has shifted. There's some stalwarts that are still doing exactly what they're doing. There's some that have evolved a little bit and thriving. There's some new ones that have come in. So as a town, I think it's changed a little bit more there than it has this direction. But part of that is, we've got an ag exclusion zone. What they grow is starting to change a little bit. That field, which may be hard to see, but right now it's clover. Couple of years here and there, it's been wheat, which has been great. I mean, let's face it, a wheat field is pretty sexy. I mean, but for almost all the years that I've worked here, going, here in Carlton, going back to 2002, it's been tall fescue growing over there, just the whole way over. And I have a horrible allergy to fescue pollen. So I'm happy to see different things being planted there. Hazelnut orchards are just have exploded all over the valley, and particularly Yamhill Valley, and more than half the acreage over there that used to be in fescue production. I think maybe they started leasing it out. One year they did garlic over there. It was really cool. But they, a couple years ago, planted that to hazelnut. And I think with this patch of clover that's here, I think, because if I understand, it's also been leased now, and the original owners who've been farming that have got somebody they've leased it to that are likely going to be transitioned to hazelnut. It could be some other crop, but I don't think they're going to continue to farm it as fescue. They didn't do that this year. The property here, we've done a few different things. The bocce courts have always, that's been part of the original landscape here. The piazza that we're sitting under, it hasn't always been covered. I found the original plans that called for, some kind of a pergola type of structure. But when, the COVID closures first happened, what was that, first week of March or something in 20? Amy Quern, she manages everything up here up front and admin-wise. We've worked together for quite some time and have a great rapport. And we do a lot of the strategic thinking around things. And the two of us were standing there looking out this window at this space and thinking about, we've got this space out here that's outdoors. And we've used it at various events and such, but obviously we don't have reliable sunshine here for most of the year. And so we need to cover it, but how do we do that? So we need to build a pergola over this. I'm like, all right, yeah, no, that's a great idea. So we're going back in the office with Jason and starting to calculate board feet of 4x4 and 2x6 pressure treated lumber and trying to cost it out. And then I talked to my brother-in-law from Woodstone Structures. He's been doing this kind of work for 30 years. And I didn't think he would have time to, mess around with us. And he was very gracious in saving me from myself. From having a chintzy-looking, pergola to this gorgeous, beam and timber space that we have here that has, hand-hewn double mortise and all the corbels and everything. It's a work of art, and like I said, he really saved me from myself. But we got this up in time for the wet season and continue to host people here throughout the winter. Beautiful little fireplace. Inez and O'Mara did the stonework there around that, and we got some heaters, got some plants, some lights, and just trying to make it a comfortable space, recognizing that it was going to be a while before we could host people indoors. And then at the first couple Cellar Club events that we did, where we have 500, 600, 700 people that'll come through in a weekend. We noticed that we had to rent the tent for the other section to get everybody through that we could get in a weekend. That the people that were sitting under the tent were all like, "What's going on? I want to sit over there." And poor Amy's fielding phone calls and emails from people like, "Can we sit under the pergola this time?" And so I think it was the second Cellar Club event that we were hosting, and she and I were standing there at the welcome table when people would come up and we would greet them, and we were standing there. She's like looking over. She's like, "We should build another one of these. We should build another one of these." I was like, "All right." And I called Brian back up, and they're like, "Yep, let's do another one." So that I think has been the biggest change. The dry set stone wall around here, Inez and O'Mara built that. It's all hand set, no mortise. That's just they've had to rebuild sections of it. As storm tree limbs come down and take out a section. The trees, the landscaping. I look back at old pictures when I started here and how small some of these Tuscan cypress were and where they are now. And those things are majestic. I love it. I'd love to plant more of those. That'll come at a certain point. The stone pine, or umbrella pine, or the Tuscan pine that you see, the kind of the bigger, wider ones. We really, I think, struggled to understand how to sort of prune and care for those. And it wasn't until my first trip to Tuscany and I saw these old ones that were really tall, and I was like, oh, you just have to keep limbing them up. Because they start off kind of growing like this, and as the branches, get bigger and heavier, they do this, and then eventually they crack and break and fall off. And so that's happened, here and there. It took a while before I recognized that, and so we've started to care for those. But the landscaping, as it's matured, it feels good to see that kind of take on a character of its own. We used to have an olive orchard here that was down below. There's like kind of this bowl that was carved in this little slope down toward the catchment pond, and Gino had terraced it out, and we had, I don't know, a couple dozen different olive trees, and I think they might have been a few different cultivars, but sadly over the years, I think those had all died off, and then we ended up transplanting maybe by 2008 or 2009, maybe earlier, I don't know. So we moved them up along the property, put them up in a higher space where it didn't get as much cold air. There's a cold air drainage that goes through there, and they were just getting, punished. And we planted some of them in cut barrels, sort of a bonsai olive tree. And that's changed a little bit. I'd love to get more olive trees on the property. Over the years, different people that have worked here, I think maybe Lisa might have been the first person to make olives from them. I remember the year that she did that. But she's so busy. We had a little cafe restaurant in here for a number of years, and took up more time of hers than it should have. But so her olive ambition kind of didn't really go terribly far. Inez and O'Mara spent a couple years, and they still do from every now and then. We'll make their own cured olives from the trees here. Jason has done that a few years here. He's also got an olive tree in his yard. Last year, I was standing out here. I don't remember what I was doing, but these two trees were just laden with olives. And I'm like, okay. So I spent about 4 or 5 hours just, and I collected a couple thousand olives, and made my own batch of olives, and got a little bit of advice from Inez and from Jason on this is what you want to do to cure them, and oh my God, I just love them. I thought, okay, I can figure out how to make those things more productive. It's fun to have them here, but Inez and Omero, I think both of them have a passion for landscaping, and we've moved plants around, we've brought new plants in, and so that's constantly evolving. We want to continue to have the view of the coastal range and the view of the pastoral charm that makes Carlton such a neat place to visit. And you see people when they sit down and they've got a wine and they're just like, particularly in the evening as the sun is setting, it gets really quiet. It's pretty cool.
You brought up 2020, so let's talk about 2020 a little bit. Everyone's favorite topic to talk about. You mentioned kind of COVID hitting and sort of some of the things you did to adjust. Tell me about sort of personal, professional reaction to COVID and its impact on the place and the changes you had to make last year to get through.
I think an event of that magnitude gives everybody an opportunity or a reason to do something different, whether it's about you personally and how you approach things, or certainly professionally if you want to if you have a business. I'm trying to think of what segment of this our economy hasn't had to change because of it. Those first couple weeks were dark, I think, for everybody. Or no, I won't say that. For a lot of people. When an entire economy shuts down and everything's being closed, and you're like, are we ever going to be able to open? You just don't know what's going to happen. And when things get like really scary and stressful, or when there's something serious that happens, oddly, because I'm kind of I have a bit of a fiery personality. As a kid, I grew up with more energy than I knew what to do with it, and had to learn, as a child, to manage my temper and all kinds of things. It's in my, part of my Sicilian blood to just, I'm a fairly reactive person, but when stuff is really serious or whatever, I tend to have a more of a calm, okay. And everything that, you couldn't turn around without some kind of messaging about, pandemic, or there's just a lot of not uplifting messaging, understandably so. But what Amy and I, as we what do? We obviously have customers. We want to, we've got to communicate what we're doing. What's going to happen in the next week or two or month or two. The one thing that we were adamant about is we didn't want to use words or have a messaging that gave people a reason to be more unsettled. We didn't have to beat people over the head with a pandemic or with COVID. They were getting that everywhere. And so we purposely kind of tooled our messaging in a way that, while obviously we're talking about health and wellness measures, without using trigger words or what as people like to say now. So that became kind of our mission. Is okay, people have plenty of reason to feel panicky or unsettled or whatever. We want to make our messaging as hopeful and uplifting as we can. We don't know if we're going to have jobs here. We don't know if we're going to have to close and if our business will get through it. There's a lot of things that we can't do right now, but we're all here. I don't want to sit at home. And we have inventory, and we were allowed to, do internet sales, phone sales, email sales, whatever. So we kind of just very quickly pivoted to listen, if you're home, if you need something, if you know somebody who can't get out or isn't safe for them to go out and they need groceries or whatever, let us know. We're here, we've got time. And that sort of set the tone for us on how we were to carry on for, kind of since then. And I don't know what's going on in the next, as we approach fall and winter, but we're not doing things any different from that. We're going to continue to toe the line 100% with, with what CDC is advising, with, whatever state mandate, we've got to play along too. But more importantly, we also kind of want to recognize that we have customers of all different types. And as part of hospitality, that's never changed. 1,000 years ago, if you were hosting a wedding, you would have people that of all different types, and as the host, it's your job to kind of try to make everybody feel comfortable. And so we try to carry on with that same type of approach, and make this a safe and comfortable and non-judgmental place for people to be. And we take our health and the health of our employees and the health of our customers very seriously. So everything we do is going to be guided on that. And it'll be interesting, I guess, to see what happens as, there's going to be some perhaps mixed messaging, where there will be suggestions but without mandates and things. And, we'll just parse our way through that. We're not daunted, and we just have to try to remain as positive as we can. Yeah. Aside from the messaging, early on, I don't know how much that was caught before the battery died.
Should be good.
Okay. We decided to also change how we engaged with customers. We used to have kind of what the standard, old school way of hosting people in the tasting room is. Everybody would come inside, and you had this sort of, this table, this bar, whatever, and people would walk up to you with their, you give them a glass, and, you pour in their glass, and, maybe someone's standing next to them, or they would go stand in the corner until they'd come up for the next one, and when you pour, you'd tell them about it, and that was just kind of the thing. And I'm sure it evolved from some guy in his, in his barn, when people would come to visit him, and they're standing around, you pour them. And obviously, if you look down at wine industries that have been around a little bit longer, Napa Valley, they adapted far before this, I think, just to sort of competition and pressure and wanting to offer a more concierge style. But this was the event that for us, we're like, okay, well, we're going to be serving people outdoors, and we're going to do table service. And we kind of attacked this very early on, so we recognized what we needed to do it. Excuse me. And we were able to order those things and get those things before supply chains were depleted, and very fortunate that way. But we got these little, crafts that, you could pour the wine into and bring it to people, and so that they're the ones, there wasn't any contact between the bottle and a splashback, and it was just a safer way to engage people. And then while you're there at the table, you can talk about the wine, explain it. They have a little bit of material that they could read about it as well. We set the tables apart so people would have a little more room, which oddly they're not that much further apart than they were anyways. As it turns out, people don't like to be sitting right next to each other anyways. So So doing table service and using the carafes, obviously the sanitizing and wearing masks and all that stuff that's been part of everybody's regime for the last 18 months. That was part of how we engage and continues to be. There was, a couple months, I guess, of maskless. I guess CDC said, you don't need to be wearing masks, but we've gone back to, the tasting room staff are masked, but outdoors, you're outdoors and you can't taste wine through a mask. So at least for now, we're not going to ask people to taste wine through a mask. But we'll just kind of continue to navigate that. I think the beauty of all this, or the silver lining for us, is this gave us a reason to dramatically change how we engaged with people on a day-to-day basis, instead of just like really turning up the hospitality for events. Like, this is a day-to-day thing now, how we engage with people, and people like that. They prefer it. It gives us more chance to tell them about the wine. There's not this sort of like, oh, excuse me, sorry, as people, some people would literally elbow their way in for a pour. I'm so glad to see that cattle call style of wine tasting go away, at least here. We'll never go back to that. So that changed that aspect of our service. We had a couple of weeks, like I said, of downtime. We did fun things on social media with some little digital things that we could interact with people that were lighthearted and engaging and kind of wine related, that we put up on Instagram and I guess on Facebook, some just goofy videos of us, Jason and I doing fun things. And if we had more time, we'd probably still do those things, but we're all just so like, all the projects that we've had around here, everybody's sort of working overtime to take advantage of the increase in business, and at some point there'll be more people available, and so we can bring on a larger staff and maybe go back to doing some of those cool videos. I don't know. They were fun. Kept our spirits up.
So tell me about your sort of initial impressions of Oregon wine industry and how it's changed in your mind in the years you've been here.
I thought you were going to say of Oregon. I grew up in the Mojave Desert, and so I remember first time when I moved here, I was coming, from the east and drove through the gorge, and if that isn't like, a dramatic gateway, I don't know. I mean, I love the rain here and the lush green, and I love this part of Oregon. I think there's a certain amount of the actual environment and the climate here that impacts the vibe of the industry. I mean, I don't know, maybe Pinot production in California is not much different, but in the early days, my early days, which are not so long ago, I think there it was just kind of getting outside of the, it was shrugging off the ma and pa vestige, and as trade organizations have popped up, and as more money has come into the area, and more investment in the land, and more interest in making brand Oregon wine, and the trade organizations have distilled a message, is the quality of the wine is just continues to improve, and then even branch out a little bit in different expressions of the grape as younger winemakers come in with different visions. But the trade organizations have done a good job of messaging to the point where, to me, it feels bigger, and it has a lot more of a established moneyed, it's an awful lot to invest in a project, and it even some of the bigger places didn't quite feel like that. I mean, King Estates was, I think that was fairly opulent when he built that spot. Domaine Juan, Domaine Serene, built some pretty big, eye-popping places. But those really aren't that unique now. There's a lot more of those places, and it now feels more like, when you travel around, in Sonoma County and Napa, and you can see that a more established industry has attracted bigger and bigger investment, and it's taking on a little bit of that feel. Relatively speaking, we're still small peanuts compared to California, and we don't have the history in some of the ancient chateaus that you find in Europe. But so we retain, I think, a bit of our humble ag vibe, and what I like to think still exists in the Willamette Valley is a certain chill, friendly vibe. And I'm not saying that those other wine industries and other places don't have that. I certainly haven't spent enough time there to make any judgment on how the industry interacts with itself, but it still feels fairly small in some ways. But there's definitely an evolution that is occurring, and I don't think it's done growing. There's still land. People are still planting. So big events like the last 18 months, that's gonna change things a little bit. But I don't know how, if it's gonna just grow to the point where it's tapped out, or hopefully there will still be a degree of camaraderie. Even just talking to winemakers in Washington and in California and in Italy and in France and in Australia, there's a certain camaraderie that comes with that. I imagine it's like that with a lot of industries. Maybe a neurosurgeon from California has kind of similar interactions with a neurosurgeon from Turkey. I don't know. Just kind of a shared experience. Like, hey, you're a neurosurgeon? Me too. I still feel that here, but I think that the messaging and the exterior has gotten a lot more polished.
So then what do you see as you look ahead for the future of the industry?
Ironically, I think that the thing that is going to change the industry here more than anything is going to be, maybe it's weird pandemic type of stuff. I don't know, but I tend to think it's, those things can be managed. One would hope that people could come together to manage that. I think that something that is much more challenging is the direction of agriculture in general, not just here but everywhere. And I don't care who you are. I don't care what paper you've read or what crackpot science you've studied, I think just about everybody can now at least agree that climate is changing. So people can argue over what's causing it. It doesn't matter. If you work in agriculture, you know it. You don't need television host to tell you something. You see it, you feel it, you deal with it on a regular basis now. And I think that's going to be the thing that changes the industry here more than anything. And as I said earlier, I think grapevines are pretty adaptable. So I don't know if they necessarily need to pivot too far from Pinot, but certainly the opportunity to grow other varietals here in the Willamette. I mean, we've had that opportunity all over Oregon. There's all kinds of different climate in Oregon, but here more localized, where I am in the industry, I kind of get the sense that the landscape here will change a little bit more due to climate, and that you're going to see more varietals being planted. You've seen for the better part of the last decade or even 2 decades, more winemakers interested in making other varietals, being located here in the Willamette and importing fruit from neighboring appellations. But you don't have to go far into the gorge to get a different weather system. But I think that there are several appropriate varietals that could be planted here and done well. Particularly if somebody has a passion to do something like that, they'll work through the challenges of learning how to grow that varietal here. So that's what I see is changing more than anything. The hillside will probably, you'll see more and more vineyards. I don't know if you'll see bigger shelf space allocated to local wines than you do already. I mean, it's pretty significant relative to, this is a fiercely loyal, support local region to live in. So the face of what people will see, out as consumers, I don't think that's going to change as much as just maybe more polish and more of it. Mm-hmm. But I think the biggest change is going to come with, is brand Oregon going to continue to be represented as Pinot? It's put us on the map, but we'll see.
So what's next for you then? For you both personally and for your work here at Cana's Feast?
Try to just improve more on what we're doing. Continue to make improvements in the wine where we can. Continue to develop cultivate a fantastic spot for people to come. That takes a lot of work, and if as you bring new people on, there's training involved, but that's at the core of the business, and we want to continue to do that. We've grown a lot in the last year and a half, and we've kind of got to our capacity with our staff and our space to host more people. Weekdays, that is where most of our business has grown, and that's great. But like our Cellar Club events, we can't really grow those without doing them back-to-back weekends. And as the winemaker and as production team, we can't continue to do all of that and do more and support here. So we've got to find ways to bring more people on, get more people working, and but eventually, we might need to expand our space along with expanding our staff. It's hard to say. It's hard to make plans if we want to grow, and we can grow our production. We do a good amount of custom crush production because we have the capacity. So as we look to continue to grow our brand and our wine production, maybe change up our equipment to allow us to increase our capacity, but eventually we'll have to build another space or expand the one we have. So for me personally, I'm looking forward to working less. This last year and a half has been very demanding physically, and I have a passion for what we do here. So it's easy to kind of keep going, but you start to recognize your limit, and age only works one way, and so it's not like I'm going to suddenly have an increased capacity. I generally take pretty good care of myself, but at 50 I'm not the guy I was at 30 when I started, and there's got to be some way to transition, but to this is my home. It's hard for me to imagine going anywhere else and doing anything different, and so I'd like to figure out how, as I'm aging, how my role here will change. But yeah, hopefully we can just grow this legacy and make this a place that just people really enjoy being, and continue on with our our original mission, which is just to provide people the opportunity to come together and enjoy each other's company.
All right, that's all the questions that I have for you. Is there anything that I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover that we should have covered?
Tap out. No, I mean, no. It's a little bit longer than I thought, but it's fun to reflect, and I appreciate having the opportunity to have my story shared or put down there for some incredibly bored person to look at later and watch.
Pull it out of the dusty basement and listen to it.
Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time and for your stories and for sharing with us, and we'll go ahead and let you off.